One of the biggest impacts that talent trees have had on Havoc Demon Hunter are just the sheer diversity of builds you can play. For Raid, you can choose between the standard single target build or the no mover build, and M+, you can choose between left-right build with Glaives, Glaive Tempest build, or even the Mimi Spread Eagle build. Wait, you're saying there's another one? You're saying there's another new build? We have 5 already. You're saying there's another one? I had to cover another build? You're kidding. You heard me right in the intro. We have another new build for Havoc Demon Hunter, this time for Mythic Plus. Now, before we get into that, if you enjoy the content, please consider leaving a like, dropping a comment down below, or hitting the subscribe button. All of those things really help me out and help to share the video to more people. Also, if you really appreciate the content, consider becoming a channel member. There's a link in the description. You get a ton of cool perks like emotes and some other stuff. So with that, let's get into the video. This new build will be a little bit familiar for those of you who watched the MDI over the weekend, and it is going to be the Frag build. Now, Frag, or Fragnance for full, is an X Echo X method before that whole weird saga thing. Raid member who plays Demon Hunter primarily, or at least he did. I don't know what he's doing now. I haven't really been following him. But in the MDI, he actually ended up playing this new build. Now, I've had a few questions. I've had a few people asking me, being like, hey, Voodoo, what's up with this new build? What is it about? Do you want to go over it? So I figured today we'll finally go over it. Now, there's a few things that are different from your regular left-right build, which just kind of looks like. This is almost like a trident build. You go a little bit down the middle. We're just going to call it the Frag build for short. It's just going to be the easiest way. No fun name this time. No eagle calling across your screen. But this build seems like it could have some interesting results in certain scenarios. So, start with the class tree. So the first thing you notice, Aura of Pain. Now, as a talent node, I do think Aura of Pain is a little weird. Now, it makes sense why you'd use it in the context of this build, which I'll get to towards the end when I talk about it. But swapping out Aura of Pain for Fellblade does give you a lot more Fury. So in this build, you're definitely going to be a little bit Fury starved. All the stuff on the left here is just stuff I filled in. Basically, the only important node in the left change here is Bouncing Glaives and Aura of Pain. You kind of want both of those. Although I guess Bouncing Glaives isn't actually that important with Soul Rend, but hey, is what it is. So you have over here just your standard stuff with Aura of Pain. Now on the right side here, we actually start to see significantly more differences. So essentially a normal left-right build would kind of drop out these 4 points in the middle here and have them in Burning Hatred, Furious Throws, Accelerating Blade, and then finally Fodder to the Flame. However, this build doesn't have those, so we're actually not spending all 10 points in their bottom gate this time. I actually believe we're only spending, I think, 9 or 8 of them. I think 9. I think we drop 1 out for up here. But this build definitely could be interesting in certain scenarios. So he's dropped Burning Hatred, which is more Fury generation. He's dropped Furious Throws, which is like a Glaive. He's dropped Accelerating Blade, which is more Glaive stuff. And then finally has dropped Fodder to the Flame in order to pick up 2 points in Blind Fury, Furious Gaze, and then finally, probably the most important part, 1 point in Inner Demon. Now, this build is going to have weird results for you. Now, some people are saying it sims better. We'll hop over to some sims after I talk about the talents. But this build is specifically built for an M+ MDI environment, right? So in the MDI, for those of you who don't know, maybe you don't follow the MDI, maybe you're not really a big WoW esports person, but in the MDI, it's very common, and not even very common, but just standard, to do massive pulls. You're basically pulling the dungeon in 4 or 5 pulls with insane target counts, which is why this build exists. So in those very giga large, insane target count pulls, where's most of your damage going to come from as Havoc? Well, most of your damage is going to come from stuff like I-Beam, stuff like Trail of Ruin Blade Dance, and most importantly, things like Rage Fire, and I guess if you're running it, Inner Demon. Our only few actually uncapped buttons are Inner Demon, Rage Fire, and Fell Devastation from Collective Anguish. Everything else has some kind of soft scaling on it or soft capping on it. Now, I-Beam being capped at 5 targets makes it so that I-Beam does a lot of damage, even at massive target counts. And Immolation Aura is also capped at 8 targets, but you know it does more damage past that and actually does a lot, especially with Growing Inferno. The main idea of this build is to grab all of those really big uncapped AoE sources. You grab your Rage Fire, you grab your Inner Demon, you grab your Collective Anguish, and this allows you to do crazy damage to those massive giga pulls. Now the thing with this season is that there's actually not a lot of dungeons where on a live key you're probably going to see yourself in these situations. But there is one, and that is Algothar Academy. In Algothar Academy, it's very common to have pull size over 8, especially in the Lasher room, right? Most of the pulls in that dungeon are fairly mid to large sized. There's very few pulls where you end up pulling less than 4 or 5 mobs. I think the only ones are that big mini boss on the platform between Croft and the other 2 wings. And then maybe some of the books if you're not combining some of those book pulls together. And then like maybe all the axes or something. But for a lot of that dungeon, you're actually pulling a large quantity of mobs together fairly reliably and fairly safely too. So this build actually could have some play or some game in that dungeon in Algothar Academy because of how much, you know, uncapped AoE there is. Now, we'll talk about a few things. So I personally think Aura of Pain is a bit troll. You only have Fury from Sigil Flame, the initial Immolation Aura hit, and then I-Beam. So I do think that swapping this for Fellblade would be a good idea. The idea behind Aura of Pain is that it funnels more damage into your Rage Fire by making your critical chance on Immolation Aura more often, as well as the damage be higher. So this is going to be like 4% extra damage on your Immolation Aura whenever it crits. But, you know, it does make sense why it's there in this build, because you get that big AoE damage. On the right side here, we've dropped out the glaive things because realistically, in those massive pulls, your glaives aren't going to be doing that much damage anyways. We pick up Soul Rend just to pass down to enemies necessary because this is very good in large AoE because of Sigil of Flame, Collective Anguish, and Rage Fire. Well, not Rage Fire specifically, but Immolation Aura. Inner Demon is selected because it is also uncapped, and this can crit, this can scale off your mastery. So this actually does a lot of damage when there's tons of targets present, and especially with your meta, right? So with meta, you'll get 3 I-Beams, or in your opener, I guess, which means you'll get 3 hits of this. So just going up to like this target dummy here, I'll just build Fury up for I-Beam. Boom, there we go. So I'm I-Beaming. I get 1. I'll get a meta. I get another one. I'm gonna I-Beam. I get a 3rd. So just looking here, we can see that Inner Demon, now obviously I wasn't doing the proper rotation or anything like that, and I was out of range for Rage Fire, whatever, but Inner Demon actually did a lot of damage there. And that's because I'm getting those 3 hits of Inner Demon. Now, if you scale this up past 5, because admittedly this is only 5 targets, it's kind of hard to get target dummies above 5. There's not a lot that exists. Then you're going to see that Inner Demon starts to do more and more of your damage. Same with Immolation Aura, Sigil Flame, and Rage Fire. So this build is really built around having that large uncapped AoE damage. And in those scenarios, I do think it's actually very good. We'll see if it's good enough in standard dungeons. I think if you're going to play this build, you're only going to play it in Algothar Academy. But we'll go into some sims now, show you what the sims are saying, and then we can do a little bit of a rotation guide. It's not very difficult, not very hard, and then we'll end off the video. Okay, so here we are at the sims. Now I'm gonna have a bunch of sims to show you guys today because I actually did my due diligence. I've done a bunch of different simming. I can give you guys a good little answer here. So I'm on raid bots. If you don't know how to use raid bots, I have a video about it. Check that out. But this right here is a Dungeon Slice sim. Now Dungeon Slice is supported for Havoc. It's not the most accurate thing, but it's a good idea to get like kind of a picture of what happens in a dungeon. So this here is our Dungeon Slice sim, and it is saying that the frag build, which is top gear C above, is roughly 2000 DPS above the raid cleave, which is just raid bots calling my left-right build because a weird issue with importing builds, but it's about 2000 DPS above left-right. Now that is the story in Dungeon Slice. Now Dungeon Slice includes meta, it includes lusts, it includes the whole thing, and comes out roughly a little bit ahead. 2000 DPS isn't the biggest difference. Now it is, you know, it's a decent difference, but it's not like it's 90k versus 112k, right? So this is showing that in a Dungeon Slice sim, this build, the frag build, is a little bit ahead. Now if we unfull screen here and go to this next build, so this is I believe this is a 5 target 40-second no bloodlust thing with meta. So we can see here 40 seconds 5 targets no bloodlust with meta. This build sims roughly 20,000 DPS higher than Raid Cleave. So this build definitely does big burst, and that is mostly due to Inner Demon. Inner Demon is very, very strong with burst because of Metamorphosis giving you 3 of them, basically. So you get 3 little chunks of that. So this is showing us that in a scenario with 5 targets, around for 40 seconds, which is roughly the size, the pull length of a pull, you could vary the pull size or pull counts a little bit. With my gear, with meta, it's doing 20,000 more DPS. Now, if we unfull screen and go to this sim, interesting. So this is 5 targets, no meta. Raid Cleave is 4,000 DPS higher. So in a scenario with 5 targets, if you are not having Metamorphosis, then this build, the left-right build, is actually better. Ignore this. I don't know what's going on here, but you know, we still have bouncing glaives, which is important. Anyways, this left-right build is actually better than the frag build in 5 targets, 40 seconds with no meta. Now, if we go up even higher, we go to 10 targets. Now, on a 10 target count pull with meta, it's actually 52,000 DPS higher. Now that is a big number. 52,000 is crazy. Now, when do you hit 10 targets? Honestly, in a lot of dungeons, not too often. Maybe the first pull of halls, a lot of Algathar Academy, actually, to be fair. But 10 targets is a pretty big AoE pull, I would say. And in those pulls, if you have Metamorphosis, you're doing 52,000 more DPS, which is a pretty decent number. Again, this is no Bloodlust, this is 40 seconds. If you have Bloodlust, the numbers might change a little bit. But realistically, Bloodlust would just kind of favor this build a little bit more, or be slightly neutral. So it wouldn't really affect too much in the grand scheme of things. Now, again, we're going to go out here and we're going to pull it up. So this is 10 targets, no meta. Now in no meta, you can see that we're still ahead, but it's only by 7,000 DPS. So what we can tell from these sims is that as you scale up your pull size, this build does get better, which makes sense, right? It's an MDI build. It's made for those massive, massive pulls. So in a scenario where you're doing those crazy, crazy big pulls, this build definitely does better. So for that reason, I think this might actually have game in Algathar Academy. Now, there are other issues with it, which when we go back to the game, I'll talk about it. But in something where you're pulling massively, right, where there's tons of big pulls, then this build does have good game against the left-right build. Now, if you scroll down, GT is like 45,000 DPS below. Yeah, don't play that in large pulls. But we can see that these are actually, you know, close, with this one being ahead. So it's a very interesting picture that these sims paint, where it shows you that in mid target counts with meta, you're better off. Without meta, you're slightly worse. But as you scale up the target counts, you do get better and better, which again makes a lot of sense because this build is tailored for those large AoE damage with stuff like Blind Fury for more I-Beam, stuff like Inner Demon. So it makes a lot of sense what these sims are showing us. Now, lastly, I just have a little bit of a quick sim here. So even in this quick sim, we can go down here, and we see that Throglaive is still going to be used, but it does drop a lot in its usefulness. It's basically just using it instead of like an Annihilation. Annihilation has higher priority than Throglaive in this situation, which is definitely unfortunate, but, you know, hey, is what it is. So Throglaive is still used in the rotation, as we can see there. But with these sims, we know that this build actually can be a little bit better, but only in those big target counts. Now, meta does make this build much better, but if you don't have meta, it's only going to be a little bit ahead unless you go higher than 10. Now, as we go higher than 10, this number and this number will get further and further apart. They'll start to gap each other more and more because of the fact that you have more uncapped damage in this build. Inner Demon does a lot. Blind Fury does a lot. So there will be more uncapped damage in this build here because we're not really playing with Furious Throws Accelerating Blade, which is better situated for lower target counts, right? Like your average dungeon pull. So we're back on the normal game here. Now, I was going to do a little bit of rotational guide, but there isn't anything too serious. It's going to be the same as your normal build, except you're basically going to deprioritize glaives a little bit. So basically, the only times I'm going to throw a glaive out on the pull to get my Burning Ruins spread, but you can also just tab target. But we'll go in and pretend this is going to be an opener. So we'll start off with Puzzle Box, of course. Now I'm going to mention the trinkets they use in MDI was Puzzle Box and Whisper Incarnate, both at 421. I don't have a Mythic Puzzle Box yet, such is my plight, but I have most of the same trinkets. So start out with our Puzzle Box. We'll Sigil, Immolation Aura as we go in. I'm going to throw a glaive out, Spell Rush, Hunt back, and then we'll hit the I-Beam. We'll use Annihilation, Backflip, Essence Break, Death Sweep, Meta, Death Sweep, Annihilation, I-Beam, and then Annihilation. And then from here, you're basically only going to throw your glaives out if you have nothing else to do. So in this scenario, I've got nothing to do, chuck a glaive. That's basically it. I'm going to use all my buttons, go out here, Annihilation, nothing to do, chuck a glaive. Backflip, use my thing, use all my buttons, Nothing to do. Chuck a glaive. So you're basically just going to use your glaive as your lowest priority filler, which is kind of the important part. Now, the big port of this video is just to talk about the build, and less so to give you guys like a rotational guide for it. But as long as you're doing your fundamentals for Havoc, you're doing those things, you're doing your essence break properly, you're doing all that properly, then this should do pretty well for you. Unfortunately, my details was bjorked and didn't actually capture my DPS properly. So I'll be right back. I'll probably put like an image over the screen of me, doing the opener actually, while I talk about the build a little bit more. So, I'll have it up on the screen for you, showing the actual damage numbers to 5 targets, whatever. But I actually want to talk about the build a bit. So, one of these things I was worried about with the build is just how little fury I would have with Aura of Pain, and with Sigil Flame, Immolation Aura, and Blind Fury being our only generators. It's actually not that bad. It's nowhere near as bad as I thought. Now, granted, there are definitely scenarios where you will run out of, fury to use. But in those scenarios, you can just use your Throw Glaives. I think having Throw Glaive as a filler where you're not actually dealing, using fury is fairly decent, right? You're losing out a lot of fury kind of demands because you don't have furious throws. Now, your glaives don't do that much damage, which is definitely a trade-off. Burning Wound does about as much as Soul Rend Dot, which is kind of unfortunate. Now, of course, Soul Rend hits harder and faster, but, is what it is there. There are a few things I don't like about this build. I definitely don't like that we have to take Soul Rend to get down to enemies necessary. I understand why we're doing it, right? I understand that Soul Rend is there to block us for any means necessary, but any means necessary is very, very strong with Immolation Aura and stuff like that. I also think it's weird we have to take Furious Gaze, but again, I know why we're taking it to get down to Inner Demon. Furious Gaze and the haste it provides us isn't very powerful or useful in single target, in AoE. Now, this build might also have a little bit more single target than the other build. That haste is a little bit better in those single target scenarios. But at the end of the day, this build is going to be good in those scenarios where you are pulling large. If you're pulling large, if you have meta for those large pulls, then this build will do very well for you and will perform quite well. However, if you're unable to pull large, if you're mostly like a 5 to 8 count dungeon pull, in most cases, then I wouldn't actually run this build. I do think, a little bit more testing will be required, but at the end of the day, this is a build for large pull counts. And if you're doing those large pull counts, then this build will do very well for you. If you're not, then I recommend you stick to the left-right build in most scenarios. I myself will probably start running this build in stuff like Avatar Academy. I think in that place, this build will do very well because of all the pull sizes, right? It'll do very well with Lashers, it'll do very well with the Tree Boss, stuff like that. So in those places, I will probably be running this build, but in a lot of other dungeons, I don't think this will really have as much utility. Maybe Ruby Life pools, you could see it too. There's some pretty big pulls in that dungeon. But overall, this is a large pull build, which makes sense for the MDI, where this build is for. And, that's just how it is. Now, Frag does recommend, might be recommending this to people on live. So that's why I kind of wanted to go through and give you guys a little, my thoughts on this build and talk about it and give a little primer for it. So that is going to be it for the video today. Drop a like on the video if you enjoyed. Leave a comment down below if you have any questions. And please consider hitting the subscribe button. It would really help me out. If you really enjoy my content, consider becoming a channel member. Channel members get access to an exclusive part of my Discord. They get access to a ton of emotes. And they get a shout out at the end of every video. So big shout out to them. So with that, that is the end of the video today. I'll catch you guys next time. So with that, have a good rest of your day. Take it easy. Peace. A big shout out to my YouTube channel members, Dimmy and Flapjack67. Your guys' support has really helped me make these videos as good as I can. If you're looking to support me and help me make more videos and better videos, then click the link in the description below to learn more about channel membership and get a ton of sweet perks while you help me make this channel as great as it can. Thank you.